Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome to the stage to Saturn and beyond, making the impossible wish possible with VR.
Perfect. I'll wait till the door closes. Well, welcome. Thank you for spending your last hour of VRLA with us. I think this is a really special way to end this two-day conference because we're really talking about how virtual reality is going to, help community and humanity and really make something that would have never happened come to life. So to give some context to the experience that we're talking about, I'm going to go ahead and play the video about it.
The day he was born, August 18th, we ended up having a C-section, and that's when they found out he had a heart condition.
Through it all, he has been stronger than we were.
Both of us, yeah.
Put together. He does not have a great physical heart, but when you see him, you feel a different spirit.
He was always fascinated with stars in the sky, making a wish when you see a star. So all of that kind of came out when the Make-A-Wish coordinator came.
So the first thing that went through my mind when I was assigned Zayden's wish coordinator was, wow, how are we going to get Zayden to blast off in a red rocket ship to Saturn?
At that point, I just sat back to see how they're going to make it happen.
First thought was Trick 3D.
I was 100% yes, we are doing this. This wish in particular is massive, and it could only come from a brain like Zayden's, which is so creative.
Zayden's mom recorded a conversation about his vision of every detail in going to Saturn.
It just set the tone. He was the creative director.
What are some of the things that you see in outer space?
Star and the moon. I see some aliens out in green.
Green? Do they talk to you?
Just say beep boop.
Oh.
Beep boop.
It became obvious that Leroy really needed to be a part of Zayden's wish. He's an amazing human being.
We continually strive to do what's next and to do it at a next level. And this project, because the creative vision was set so high by Zayden, has brought all of that to fruition.
To make the impossible wish possible, this is how we did it, and then blew it up 10 times.
Engage the Zayden set. Zayden 7 is in position. Initiating boarding. We've arrived at Saturn. Time to head home.
Well, that was amazing. And just to get us started, we'll, Chad, start with you. Just introduce yourself and what your role was on the project.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Chad Eickhoff, and I directed it, and my studio, Trick 3D, produced it and executed it on the project. And we love taking all the direction from Zayden on this one. So his vision was, it was really leading the way, and we'll get into why that's actually really important for VR, I think. But that's who I am.
I'm Captain Meredith Kirchhoff, and I'm the Director of Public Affairs for 22nd Air Force at Dobbins Air Reserve Base in Marietta, Georgia. And my role on the project was to facilitate the location. So we held this wish at Dobbins, and Make-A-Wish, they approached us about hosting this and providing the locations that would really bring this to life. And we were just so honored to be selected and to be able to say yes to hosting Zayden and his wish. So I really worked on all things that were kind of logistics and location and just kind of bringing that the physical to the virtual experience.
And I'm Veronica Sheehan. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Make-A-Wish Georgia. At the time of the wish, I was a former board member and just a volunteer. And really, I guess I'm the one that kind of started it.
Will you talk a little bit more about how Make-A-Wish even came to thinking about VR as an option for making a wish come to life?
So, one of the things that I will challenge everybody here in this audience is to think about what you can do with VR that's not traditional. And that's what happened here. A good friend of mine, Craig Heil, who was on a panel yesterday, we're both former Turner executives, and we had been talking about virtual reality and studying it, and it was probably, I guess it was like November, or maybe it was 2 years ago when we even started thinking about this. And I said, and he actually said, what if we used VR for good? And I said, Make-A-Wish has to have something that we can do. And so I went back to the office and I talked to the head of the wish coordinators and she said, well, we have this little 7-year-old boy who wants to blast off in a red rocket ship and go to Saturn. And we've been trying to figure out how we're going to get him there. And I said, I know how we're going to get him there. And that's how it started.
Amazing. And will you talk a little bit about how you and Chad connected with Trick 3D and how that whole thing started to take off?
So, it's interesting. For those of you that may not know or may know, Georgia has a very vibrant film, media, and television community. And it's small, but it's big at the same time. And, ironically, Chad and I didn't know each other, but we had friends in common. And Candace Alger, who was in the video, is very good friends with Craig. It's, connecting all the dots. And that's how she actually brought Chad and Trick 3D to the table. And we knew this was going to be ambitious, and we knew it was going to take time and money, and we were hoping somebody would want to sign on for it. And, we had probably the best partner that we could have ever had in Chad and Trick 3D.
Thank you.
So with that, Chad, will you talk a little bit about hearing about this project, receiving the brief, and what excited you about it and what made you nervous, maybe technically, of creating this experience?
Yeah, I'm going to rewind just a minute. So what was happening concurrently on my side is I had made a TV special that was really successful for the Elf on the Shelf brand. And what gave me the opportunity to really start thinking, what do I want to do next? We did it independently, and I was super intrigued and excited about virtual reality. And so we started exploring how do we move animation into virtual reality and what's possible with that. And we had done a lot of research and a lot of internal tests. And one of the key learnings came from my son. And I brought him into the studio, and we had watched some Pixar shorts before going in, and then we watched Henry, which was one of the first Oculus Story Studio virtual reality shorts. And it was essentially a Pixar short in virtual reality. And then he did it, and I asked him, well, which would you prefer? Would you prefer to do the watch the video, or would you prefer to do this virtual reality? He said, I'll probably just watch the video. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting. Well, why? And he said, well, the character, he said that his name Henry, he never acknowledged me. And I realized in that moment there's a huge difference between VR and watching a movie. And as a filmmaker, and as so many people in LA are filmmakers, trying to bring that into virtual reality was actually the thing that is like the big handicap. And Zayden's wish came knocking like right after that, learning. And it was the thing that realized like it's the ability to bring a wish to life that is virtual reality is like checking a major box and having a character that you're going to interact with when you get there. Zayden just came and he just instinctively knew the answer to how VR works because he's a kid whose imagination allowed that to happen. So that's when it came, I was like immediately thought, wow, I've been researching it and as an adult trying to figure it out, and he has the answer, like right out of the gate. And so to me, it was a big opportunity from the creative standpoint, but then from the technical, moving the animation workflow into a real-time engine and opening the possibilities of how you execute that, we were like pushing on the boundary of what we made it in Unreal, what that tool could do at the time. Like we were in communication with Epic on the daily because they were doing patches and updates that would change things that we did the week before. So technically that was a challenge. Incorporating real location was something I felt was very important. So we talked early on about like trying to get a hangar somewhere to make that transition very smooth. And so all of the pieces started to play in, but those were the major challenges and opportunities.
Yeah, so talking about that a little bit, I'm kind of jumping around my questions, but you know, making an experience feel real and knowing that you wanted to have him walk into an experience physically as the beginning of opening up what this is going to turn into in a virtual world. Will you talk a little bit about that choice and how you did it?
Yeah, the choice for me is any project I start, I usually just sort of start with what makes this special. And we had been trying to figure that out with VR a good bit. And for me as a creator, one of the things I kept seeing was people jarred by the first entry. And I'm a big fan of the cross dissolve as a director, so soft transitions are good for me. And so when we were talking about it, I thought the added, well, one more element that came into play here was there were some question marks about Zayden and how he would respond to being in virtual reality, period. And so that was another thing we were taking into account, like, because immediately people were like, oh, you're gonna have a rumble chair and it's gonna be shaking and wind machines, we can do all these things. And, you know, for Zayden, had some sensory issues to consider.
Yeah, he didn't like loud noises. And we're like, well, a rocket ship, it's pretty loud, right?
Zayden's rocket ship was covered in tape so that it didn't make loud noise. That was his creation.
Yeah. And the other thing that Chad was lucky to get was that his mom, I think in the video we said, his mom recorded a conversation. And it was basically, I was like, oh, this is your creative brief. Like, you don't.
Could you just do that one more time?
Oh. We didn't hear that note. That was a creative brief, which was like, I could have kissed his mom. Like, she recorded the whole thing. It was like, I forget how long it was, but it was great. And I think, you know, the other thing that was, we as creatives, because I still was like, oh, we could do this, Riz. It was Zayden's wish, right? It's just like, you know, the filmmaker or the writer, you know, what did they want? Well, we had to stay true to a 7-year-old's idea of space because we wanted to really, you know, do photorealistic stuff. And, you know, that's why I'm like, hats off to Chad because he really made sure that we stayed on script, on Zayden's script.
Yeah, and I think, and I had a little bit of the benefit in VR too. The thing that sells VR is not the render quality right now; it's the immersion and the presence, and and there's a lot of anybody that makes filmmaking wants things to look beautiful, and there are inherent limitations with the technology on that side. So there's a lot of great companies pushing that, but to me, I equate it like, you know, when Toy Story first came out. They did toys because people didn't look good in the technology, and they still kind of characterize the characters because it's a little weird if they're photoreal. And so to me, it was his vision, and two, I knew the immersion really was the most important part. And Zayden knew that instinctively, so we just had to catch up.
He was thinking as an experience rather than like frame by frame story, which is so interesting to see that.
Well, and one piece to that that's critical is his had a red rocket ship. And to me, this is where Lockheed and Dobbins Air Force Base came in to play was so critical because I really wanted him to see it as if it was a real rocket ship. And it wasn't necessarily how we were going to render it, but it was the fact that to set up what he saw, he had this insane experience of like a motorcade that drove him into the Air Force Base, a real-time astronaut, Leroy Chow, 6-time International Space Station commander as his co-pilot walking in with him, down like people who are all cheering, to a seat in the middle of a real Air Force base. And when he put on his space goggles, because he didn't know this was VR. There was nothing that was like a VR request in this wish. It was to go to Saturn. So process that. His wish was to leave the planet and go to Saturn.
Which no one's ever done.
Which no one's ever done until now. Yeah. But so what we did when he put on the space goggles is we modeled the interior of the hangar so that he saw the same thing. And so it was sort of pseudo AR. But what it did is when it opened and you saw the red rocket ship come out, after the experience and he saw it go back down, he took off his space goggles and he said, "My red rocket ship's down there." Because it was for him. And that's a very important part of the process.
Yeah, that's amazing. Will you talk a little bit about how the community at the Air Force Base came together around this experience?
Absolutely. So this experience was timed such that we had a big deployment going out to the Middle East 7 days later. And so what was so amazing about this was Make-A-Wish, the office is really just a couple of miles away from Dobbins. But we never really interacted in this way. And so when we got this request, we were kind of like, oh man, we're so busy right now. We're about to send 150, 200 people out the door for a deployment. But at the same time, we so much wanted to be a part of this for this kid. And so we just said yes anyway, even though we had a lot going on. And what was just so amazing was that even though there were so many people on base who were, getting final training, checklists, packing, saying goodbye to their families in just a few days, they still wanted to be involved with this wish. They still wanted to be dedicated to making this experience so special for Zayden. And so I think from a community standpoint, we all built off, of course, the VR experience we knew would be amazing, and that was the center of everything. And then from there, we just built it out. And so like Chad said, when Zayden came through the front gate at Dobbins, we had airmen on the corners of the streets where he turned, saluting him. It was a whole motorcade full of security forces vehicles with lights on and everything. And then we just kind of took that experience and built it out so that it was really exciting and fun for Zayden and involved so many airmen from our base. But it was also seamless with the VR. And I think that was so cool for him from his experience, and also just cool for us because we gained from this. We were on the receiving end too. We weren't just giving. And that was just what was so great about it, was that it was just this really neat timing that we got to be involved with this and then turn around and some people to go deploy, but they got to leave on this note of, we had just experienced this and been a part of this magical day, really, it was. And so it was just a really neat community thing in addition to being a cool technical thing. So.
One more thing on the community, which I thought was amazing, from the Make-A-Wish side all the way through the Air Force and then to production. There are some real diverse personalities and all the people that come together to make it happen. And I always remember going into the first meeting at Dobbins and put some artist developers and who come to work in their cargo shorts and tank tops and t-shirts, walking onto an Air Force base where everyone looks immaculate and amazing, like Meredith right now. And there was awkwardness on both sides of the table. Air Force men were like, okay, I'm super intimidated because you're creative. And then creatives oh my God, I'm super intimidated, I'm on an Air Force base. But within 2 minutes, it all went away because Zayden's wish was this binding glue between personalities that are so different but highly respectful of each other. And Make-A-Wish does that on the daily. It pulls people in like that. And it's really an honor to be a part of something that does that.
Yeah, and that's the thing, you were saying, even though you had so much going on, everybody was using their talent, everybody was bringing something to the table, and that's the magical thing, and that's, I still don't know if Chad actually really explained to Make-A-Wish how much effort and time and money you put into this project. But the desire to give back and do something and use everyone's talent to give and help and heal a child. You know, his mom, the thing that got me the most was the day before we walked through the whole experience for the mom because he had sensory issues. And she did the whole experience. She took the goggles off and she broke down. There's a piece in there, it gets me every time. And she said, my son will never win a championship. He'll never play soccer like most kids. You just gave him the championship of his life. This is remarkable. And she couldn't be more grateful for everyone that came out to help. And that's, you know, it started with a conversation around two people with knowledge of technology and what we can do with it. And this happened. So that's where I keep going back to challenging everybody in this room.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit about Zayden, and we talked before about him taking to VR. And so I think it's worth talking about kind of what worked for him and what didn't. And then maybe talk a little bit about how you guys did some test flights and some training for him. So maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it was really Chad's idea to have a kind of a test day. And we said, well, we can do astronaut training. And that's when we brought in Commander Leroy Chow. And he flew from Houston to Atlanta to do training day with Zayden. And that's when we could introduce, you know, the idea of virtual reality and the goggles, you know, because you guys have been putting headsets on all day and in your careers, it's not comfortable. And so if you got a 7-year-old with sensory issues, like what is this gonna do? So Chad, you can explain what happened and then I'll tell everybody what I was saying off to the side.
Yeah, so astronaut training day to me was an effort to just not completely embarrass everybody attached to it, because we were thinking if Zayden comes in and there's all this pomp and circumstance that leads up to him sitting down and it's like, here are your space goggles. He's like, I hate it, and flips it off. It's gonna, you know, we all were mentally preparing for that, but this was an effort to try and avoid that. So we had built a couple custom pieces for Zayden to come in and try what he liked or didn't like. So we tried the Samsung Gear headset with a specific experience, and then we had made one with HTC Vive that was more fully immersive, which again, we weren't sure if he would like or dislike, but that one was a gravity test where he would sit in a chair, and then all these like play balls, like from a play pit, would drop into the room. And then when he was ready, he would say, okay, I'm ready. And then we would push the button and everything would start to float. And so he put on the Gear headset and he immediately said, I don't like it, I don't like it, I don't like it, take it off. And his mom took it off. And we're like, okay, that's okay. That's
yeah,
okay.
And so Candace and I are off the corner like, oh shit, this is the wish. This is how we're getting there. He hates it.
So I was
But like, a great director.
So we talked him down from that a little bit. And his mom was an amazing help too, convincing him to move to the next one. And Commander Chow, who was at this point already Zayden's best friend, said, this is how we all do it. You're gonna have to, man up. And so he put on the HTC Vive, and he was actually totally cool. He was sitting there, and then when he was like, okay, I'm ready. And we did it, and he goes, whoa! And his feet went up, and his hands went up, and he was looking around, he was like, this is so cool. And then he was like, came down, and we realized then, like, okay, and that's when we realized the presence and the immersion is what mattered. So we learned a lot, what he liked and didn't like. We tried some things with sound, and that was imperative too. But the headset choice for him was very important.
Yeah. Well, talk a little bit about creating an experience that's accessible. I don't feel like that conversation happens that much in this space, that there's a lot of people with different abilities. And so in creating an experience specifically for someone who has some physical challenges, how much did you have to do yourself versus what was already kind of built into the headsets that you could adjust in terms of accessibility?
A lot of it was just creative choices. The technology is very accessible, and I think a lot of the people who have issues with nausea or anything else are using the wrong technology. Like if you're using the right technology, you can address that. But some of the things like a chair that's trying to be in sync or like that, anything that gets out of sync is an issue. And so we knew to avoid loud noises. But then we were also like, well, do we give him headphones or do we play it through speakers? Because if we give him headphones, he's getting more enclosed. And we at one point talked about building the goggles into an actual space helmet. And again, looked really cool, sounded really cool, but felt very like claustrophobic for anybody. And so a lot of those things came into play. We ended up going with speakers and not headphones, which was its own interesting thing. We learned a lot. Like there's a lot of people who are trying to explore location-based and what's the platform going to be. And that will continue on. And I've realized as you were talking, like, you know what? All the investment and everybody that's like pushing into location-based will never have an Air Force base lined up with real like Air Force personnel like cheering them on. Like that's pretty epic.
That the void.
Take that. Just take that.
No, I was seriously, you guys, this is not my area of expertise. I am not a VR person. I don't work in this space whatsoever, but I did the VR experience and sitting in that hangar, and I know what the hangar looks like. I've been in the hangar before, and putting on the Vive and literally still being in the hangar was just, it blew my mind. And again, this isn't what I do, so maybe that's why it blew my mind. But it was just seriously such an amazing, seamless, truly seamless transition. And so I do have kids myself, and I was just so worried about Zayden and him being kind of scared or, reacting negatively, like you said. But I just think the choices you made were so perfect for him, and watching him do it was just absolutely amazing. But yeah, location, big deal.
It was a big deal.
Yeah. It really was.
And it's actually, again, let's just servicing what Zayden was envisioning happening. And it's just, a lot of times when I'm describing virtual reality to people, we all as adults bring a preconceived notion of what the world is to creation or anything else. And a child comes to it and is immediately thinking of what it could be, not preconceived of like how you're going to do it or what happens in a hangar. Like we can all talk about, well, the plane comes in here and gets refueled or gets serviced. Yeah, for all he knows, there's a rocket that comes up. And so there's nothing stopping that envisioning. But to your point of accessibility, that's a big part of it for everybody. Like making his dream and his wish come true proved the point that level of accessibility for most people is still required for location-based. And I had seen that in testing too, that there's just a lot of people who get disconnected from the whole, they don't like being disconnected from the world that quickly. And someday that may change, and a lot of us who would be at this conference would not feel that, but the majority of people do. And I think it's a simple element, but that idea of a blended world, of starting with our world and blending the CG into it, even people like the Void are realizing that. It's very important.
It's one of those flaws, I think, of going to conferences and watching work, even though everyone does it the best that they can, but I find that you can't fully be present when you can hear the other world, right? And so that blending of the two environments really allows for that presence, which is talking about the HGC and using that really helps you take off into this new world. So let's talk a little bit about, we talked a little bit about it, but Zayden's reaction at the end and what his family felt and how the community felt on the day and how many times he did the experience and all of that fun stuff.
Yeah, I mean, again, everybody came out for this. I mean, there was everything from the two individuals who made his costume, his astronaut suit, to, Cobb County SWAT team, that wanted to give him a police escort. The thing about, and it's interesting because I have my 8-year-old son here and he's been doing all the experiences in the showroom, and the imagination of a child, this kid believed he was an astronaut. He really did. And we created that real life environment for him to feel like he was an astronaut. And so he went at it like he was on a mission. And that to me was just amazing, right? You know, we were all kind of emotional and worried and all that, but he was like, I'm here and I'm doing this. So that's the thing that sticks out for me the whole day. And he can get tired. You know, we knew he'd be tired. That's why we walked through the experience with his mom and dad the day before. But he was pushing it. He loves countdowns. He wanted to, have I forget what the plane was. I'm horrible with the planes. A C-130. He actually commanded a C-130 to take off. I mean, this day started at 7 a.m. and didn't end until 2 or 3 for him. But he was a trooper from day one because we helped him believe, but he knew he was going to be an astronaut that day.
I think it's an interesting point because, again, if you go from his perspective, there's no VR attached to this story. The story is a story about Zayden going to Saturn with another astronaut from an Air Force base. And no one ever uttered the word VR around him. That was not like, we're all talking about it because we know that's how we made it. But from a standpoint of the experience and the standpoint of a creator, that doesn't matter. The way you approach VR is the real world, and then I add superpowers, add amazing wishes and things that we would never think are possible. And we get used to that. But from his perspective, that was all very, very real. And it blows me away that he wasn't afraid. Like, it was real to him. And he sat there and watched a giant rocket ship emerge from the ground and was like, put me on board.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, when you put yourself in that frame of mind, most of us are going to turn and run. There's like no way. I'm not actually going to Saturn. So.
I've been finding, and one of the things that I say in terms of VR storytelling is that it's going to be successful when the tech falls away. So it's like when you're reading a book and you forget that you're turning a page, like you're engrossed in a story. So the mechanism in which you're learning the story isn't important anymore. And by the sounds of it, that's exactly what happened for Zayden. It wasn't technology. He was having an experience. And curious if other people did the experience and had similar, what their reactions were, and how was somebody else experiencing Zayden's wish? Was it as real for them?
I don't think it was as real for anybody other than Zayden, because one was his wish, and there's the 10-year-old threshold of like where you start to really question things. But everyone else really did get transported. I mean, watching Craig's wife do it the night before, I thought was really, really fun and interesting. But everyone brings to it some element of how they came to it, for sure. So I think that's it was custom made for Zayden. So there are a number of countdowns that I might be like, really, another countdown? But Zayden was like, 10, 9, 8, like over and over every time.
And any other children do the experience, and how was were they able to take Zayden's ride in the same way?
We did. We had, I can't remember her name, but we did have another child come out. I think he was 4 or 5, and he did it the day prior. He loved it. His reaction wasn't the same as Zayden's, though, because it wasn't his reality. Right. It was, he understood there was technology there. So, yeah, but he loved it. It was, and I did it, and it was amazing. So I'll leave it at that. But no, it was truly pretty special.
Yeah, so what I'm kind of getting is this experience, like, are you going to release it somewhere?
Yes, Chad, you better release it. And donate to Make-A-Wish when you do.
And that's right. We have discussed a number of things on how that will go. I think to me, there's an element of making a wish come true. This is a huge opportunity. To me, it's a shining example to anybody who's a creator in VR of how you approach it. Everyone's still failing because they're calling it VR. Like just what you were saying, like go to the theater and watch VR, or go to a VR bar and it's all about VR. We're still talking about VR, and you're not talking about the thing that you're getting to do through that. And that's starting to happen, and it will, like the new Star Wars experience that The Void is doing is talking about doing a Star Wars experience, and big brands coming will help for sure. So it'll move in that direction. But to me, I think it's also an opportunity to see okay, we can do this with one child's wish. How do we now actually impact the world with that? And so to me, it's a little bit larger of an opportunity than just release Zayden's specific wish. And it's how do we take everything from Zayden's wish and turn it into a platform that can actually improve, hundreds of thousands or millions of children's, plights that they have to deal with across the world.
Yeah, so that was actually my next question is like, what is Make-A-Wish's kind of goal in exploring the new technology, and kind of, do you have ideas of where you're going next?
Kind of to Chad's point, it's what do we need to accomplish and what's the technology to do it? Because we spend a lot of time and effort in a wish for one child, but just in Georgia alone, we have 800 kids waiting for wishes. And there are complications around some of it. Some has to do with just family situations, or the kid is too sick to do their wish, or we don't have enough money to grant the wishes. And we're one of 62 chapters around the United States, 30 chapters internationally. And, so our conversations now are more about how do we do, what's a common wish that we can build around the technology that's out there. So that's what we're trying to explore. What would give us, the most bang for our buck, as well as reach many more kids? Because really, there was no one other kid that wanted to go in a red rocket ship to Saturn. It was his wish. There's none other out there. So we want to do more. The innovation is not going to stop. Someone said to me the other day, like, I went to your wish ball and you guys did intergalactic space travel. What's next for you, And so that's something that we're talking about for the future.
Intergalactic space travel.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Tonight with Captain Meredith.
Are you ready? And what about Trick 3D? Do you think you're going to kind of keep making wishes come true?
Oh, absolutely.
Of course.
Yes.
Even if they're your own wishes.
Yeah, I do. I'm very excited about the fact that the new technology that's evolving, just what good can come of it and what can you do with it. It solves so many problems that can be very technical in terms of efficiencies in a company and all the things like training and what product design that people look at. And we work in those, but we kind of use those because those are where the money flow of the world is. But then we can take from that and say, here's what works and here's what we can do that's a positive impact outside of just, there's obviously positive impacts of working with big companies, but there's some things that aren't driven by money. And I think these are the kind of opportunities that those will allow. So we're definitely excited about that. And as a creator, I'm excited about, we're building a slate of shows that will explore, and Zayden's wish is integral in this, how we can both create original episodic content, but then the same world that the director is inhabiting to create that content is then leveraged for immersive content as well. And so that's kind of a whole new pipeline, but it's a lot of new content and a lot of new wishing from me. So.
And then is the Air Force Base going to continue to partner with Make-A-Wish and do some more work together?
We certainly hope so. So we've just, up until this point, continued our relationship and conversations and all of that. But we do absolutely hope as a community that we're part of now to have the opportunity to host more or be involved with more. I think one thing that was so unique about this is I've talked to people about this, and so many Air Force bases across the country do pilots for a day. Come out, have the kid have this cool experience where he's the aircraft commander, and he gets or she gets to be a pilot for a day. So when everyone heard about this, everyone immediately assumed, oh, it's pilot for a day. Everybody kind of knows pilot for a day. That's a thing, and we oftentimes jump in and do that for kids. Through Make-A-Wish or maybe other organizations. And but this was so unique. This was so different. It wasn't pilot for a day. I was astronaut for a day, but it was certainly so much more than what everyone was used to seeing. So certainly we want to continue to be involved, but at the same time, I'm not sure what else will live up to what we got to do with Zayden. So we're waiting.
Yeah, that's right.
Let me know.
Yes, absolutely.
But no, absolutely. We were so honored to be a part of it.
Amazing. I have one more slide, which is if anyone's interested in learning more about the mission and Make-A-Wish, here's a way to get in contact. And we have like 15 minutes left, so I don't know if we want to take questions or if there's anything else we want to talk about.
Dance party?
Dance party. Does anybody have questions about the technology, how we got involved, Make-A-Wish, VR for good or for impact?
Oh, I got a question.
Oh, question. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Question, Mike. Nice.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Very inspiring. So as I sat back, I Googled what the mission of the Make-A-Wish Foundation is. And it's granting wishes, and also it talked about to kids that are having life-threatening situations and to give hope. And I also thought about other potential uses with regard to education. So I'm sure, and unfortunately, I guess realistically, all of the kids that Make-A-Wish works with probably, unfortunately, may not make it. You know, there's that attrition rate. So you're trying to give them hope, but giving hope to the human spirit perhaps can make that child have a healthy life. So in that event, I guess the question is, do you know from an educational standpoint if this is being considered, or VR is being considered in the classroom? Because I can imagine as a kid, you take and you expose what they think is impossible, or it could be how, for example, you take your kid to work for a day. So I think that this just opens up the spectrum where as a younger kid, they have ways to explore different opportunities. Because a lot of times you think about, well, you ask your kid, what do you want to do when you grow up? And a lot of times they tell you this, and sometimes they tell you what they think that you want to hear. I think the bottom line is that, you know, when it comes to professional development and mentoring, there's different programs out there and you can shadow, but as you probably know, you really don't know if you like what you're doing until you do it, and then you may change your mind. So having said all that, I think this is an excellent way to expose people, for example, when it comes to careers of, hey, this is what is really like, kind of, in terms of what you want to do. So I think this is good, and it gives hope, and perhaps it sparks the child to think about the career. So wondering if anybody knows or if there's any work. I realize the education piece might be outside the swim lane here, but just wanted to get your thoughts.
I do know that a lot of people talk about virtual reality as the democratization of experience. So it's allowing people to get experiences that they might have not been exposed to by what their life has given them or what they've been born into. And so this is kind of a way for people to get to really feel and understand what it's like, you know, across different career paths or vocations. But I definitely know Google is doing a good amount of work in the education space. And it's different things from, you know, doing Shakespeare in VR to taking people to museums and allowing people to actually experience what they're learning in a way that is more sticky for the brain than reading. At least that's been my experience with education. I don't know if anyone.
Yeah. No, and you know, to your point, I mean, you know, I'll speak on behalf of Make-A-Wish. You know, there's a lot of research about what giving these children that are facing life-threatening medical conditions hope and what that does to sustain them. There'll be more studies coming out in the next few months, but you know, whether it's a child that's healthy or a child dealing with an illness, to give them the possibility of, you know, we talk about this was the impossible wish made possible. It's anything in life, right? And yeah, you know, VR can put you into situations where you may never have had the opportunity to experience. For us, we're focused on, you know, if 51% of the wishes for across the United States are Disney wishes, but you're too sick to get to Disneyland or Disney World or on a Disney cruise, well, how do we get you there? If you want to meet a famous celebrity, but that celebrity only has a certain amount of time per year, and you get on a waiting list, and it might take you 4 years to meet that celebrity, how do we get the celebrity to you? How do we transport you to the land of Sodor? I can't believe how many Thomas the Tank Engine wishes we seem to be getting. How do we get to Sodor? How do we put you there? So, I've seen, and I can't wait for others to see, that's why I beg you to sign up for Make-A-Wish America's emails about what these wishes do for kids. There was one boy who was 14, his doctor prescribed a wish. They're actually prescribed now by doctors. That's how we get our referrals. That he was having all these seizures and he wanted to go meet a famous basketball player. And he did. And they tried to get his medicine right so he wouldn't have seizures on the trip from the East Coast to the West Coast. And he had 2 other brothers who were with him. They got to meet the famous basketball player. They got to go to Disneyland. And the boy finally felt like a big brother because the boys were like, you gave us this experience. You're my big brother. Do you know he hasn't had a seizure since that moment? 7 years. The doctor said, we don't know how this happened. He said, the only thing we can say was that this wish was magical. And so they continue to prescribe wishes. We cannot stop the referrals coming in the door. We get 40 to 60 a month. And so we're trying to keep up with that demand. And, we're a nonprofit. We try to stick to 80% of our dollars go to program. So that 20% that goes to administrative, we got to use the most out of it. So there's not a lot of hands. We beg volunteers to help us. So, this is the kind of stuff that I'm passionate about speaking on. And that's why when you get partners like these individuals up here that want to make a difference, and, Chad is a private business owner, and he put his effort and his dollars to work, right? And Meredith had to get a lot of people to agree to things that they probably never agreed to before. And that's what the ability we have as human beings to make a difference, whether it's in education, whether it's in healthcare or other areas. Take what you know from your technical powers and do something good for it and with it.
I think there's a really amazing multiple things in what you just said. But one thing that bridges the gap for me when you talk about education and when you were just talking about that is there's that mystical power of the wish that is of feeling a sense of wonder that is inherently generated by the imagination, that starts with the imagination of a kid. And imagination really is the pathway to wonder. And in education, those are 2 things that aren't taught. Like, if anything, they're kind of taught away from traditionally. And as we move into such an automated society, those things are extraordinarily important. And there is now a bridge between those 2 things where you're like, okay, you can't grant a wish for even every kid and Make-A-Wish. How in the world are you going to sort of extend that capability to every kid that's in education system? And there is some power in VR to do that, to say, okay, if there's such power in a wish, then even a kid who's not terminally ill but is depressed, how do you address that? How do you bring a sense of hope and wonder to the day? And it's not going to all be through VR, hopefully, please. We just want it in interpersonal communication. But to your point, democratization of experience, there are a lot of kids who just don't see positive in their day-to-day. And so giving them an opportunity to get to that, I think, extends some of those learnings that this really becomes a great shining light of how to follow that.
We have about 5 minutes left, but that's such a beautiful note to end on that I'm kind of tempted to end early unless there's any other questions from anyone. You have one? Okay.
Wonderful presentation, by the way. My question hopefully might be a little bit shorter. You mentioned that you had to deal with audio sensory limitations. I was curious if there were any other sensory limitations and what you did to compensate during the development and production around those limitations?
There was actually kind of a mystery of what he was just, we all knew he was very sensitive, but they weren't all necessarily prescribed sensitivities. So that was the astronaut training day, was a large part of figuring that out. And what we learned about Zayden is once, and his mom was critical in this, he would get past the first of an experience. He was so brave that he was then like okay with it for the most part. But some of the ones we worked around, you know, with this, there are so many things as a creator and so many VR you want to explore. Full 360 audio, like immersive, vibrating chairs, and, you know, bringing in wind machines, things that are definitely more immersive and would be fun to explore, but we knew that that would be pushing it too far for Zayden. It even came down to the chair. Like, regardless of that, should his feet be touching the ground, or is it okay that they dangle? Like, does the chair rotate or not rotate? And those are all questions like that for most people you don't have to consider. The fit of the headset, like, do we have to augment the headset in some way if he's feeling like too compressed inside of it? So we considered a lot of those things and just sort of found the way for Zayden on this one. I think there are some learnings that are applicable to everybody. For the most part, we were definitely focused on making sure this was Zayden's wish that was executed flawlessly, and hopefully he didn't pull it off and say he wanted to quit. Thankfully he did not.
That talks a lot to like the importance of testing in VR. I think in every experience I think you want to test as much as possible of how people are responding to it. It has a lot of that iterative design feel, I think. And you had something you wanted to add?
No, I was just going to say, it was the loud noises and the sudden jolts and stuff we were worried about, but you designed a beautiful piece where he did get into that rocket, but it was very smooth. And even the voiceover, you know, of, who was the voiceover talent again? Was it one of your staff members?
It was not. It was a friend of one of our staff members.
Okay.
Who's actually a professional voice artist, but but you're right, which I sort of glossed over that. But there was, in all the creative decisions, the pacing was slowed down a notch, and the audio was definitely like, you know, lessen down the bass. And there was a lot of factors in that too. And the voiceover was certainly one of them.
It was very calming. You know, it wouldn't be like in a normal situation where you'd have lots of back talk and radio frequency. It was very, embark the Zayden 7, you know, like very calming for him. So.
Amazing. So I'll give one last shout out for questions if there's anyone else. If not, let's give a round of applause for this amazing experience.
Thank you, Jess. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.